You are 19 years old. The iron around your wrists has worn the skin raw. Every small movement sends a thin line of fire up your arms. The cell smells of damp stone, old straw, and something heavier. Not quite mold, not quite decay. Something human. The air is thick with it. You breathe it in because there is no other choice. Above you, footsteps pass. Laughter sometimes, English voices. You understand enough to hear your own name spoken like a trophy. You once rode at the head of an army. Now you measure time by the sound of keys turning in a lock. This is how it ends for Joan of Arc. Not in a blaze of battlefield glory. Not with a sword in her hand. But in a prison cell in Rouen. Inside a system that has already decided she must disappear. To understand what happened in those final days, you have to understand what she had become. In 1429, France was collapsing. The 100 Years' War had drained the country for generations. English armies controlled vast territories. French nobles hesitated. The uncrowned King Charles waited in uncertainty. The war was no longer only about land. It was about legitimacy. Who did God favor? Into that fracture stepped a peasant girl from Domremy who claimed to hear saints. She did not bring wealth. She did not bring lineage. She brought certainty. At the siege of Orleans, something shifted. Hardened soldiers followed her not because she outranked them, but because she believed without hesitation. The siege broke. English lines collapsed. Momentum returned to France. Months later, Charles was crowned at Reims, with Joan in armor beside him. Symbol became reality. A teenager had altered the psychology of a war. That was her greatest crime. On the battlefield, the English could fight her. In the realm of belief, she was untouchable. If she truly acted under divine guidance, then English occupation was not only military, it was ungodly. So they chose another arena. In May 1430, she was captured near Compiègne by Burgundian forces allied with England. It was not a heroic fall, it was confusion, a gate closing too soon, a retreat gone wrong. She was taken, held, and eventually sold to the English for a staggering sum. This was not ransom, it was acquisition. They did not want a prisoner of war. They wanted a public unmaking. By the time she was brought to Rouen in late 1430, the outcome was already designed. The trial would be ecclesiastical, overseen by church authorities loyal to English interests. It would appear lawful. It would be documented carefully. It would speak the language of theology and procedure. It would end in death. Inside the prison, the rules of canon law were quietly ignored. She should have been held in an ecclesiastical prison guarded by women. Instead, she was confined in a secular military fortress, watched constantly by English soldiers. She was chained, sometimes by the feet, sometimes by the waist, secured to a wooden beam at night. Isolation does something to the mind. It bends time. It magnifies doubt. Every memory becomes suspect. Every silence grows teeth. The interrogations began in January 1431. Over 70 sessions followed. Bishops and theologians questioned her relentlessly. She had no legal counsel, no advocate to object, no ally to rest a hand on her shoulder. They aimed at her voices. Were they from God? Could she prove it? Did she know she was in a state of grace? Each question was a trap constructed from doctrine. A wrong answer meant heresy. A proud answer meant presumption. Silence meant guilt. Yet again and again, she answered with disarming precision. When asked if she was in God's grace, a theological snare with no safe response, she replied, "If I am not, may God put me there. And if I am, may God so keep me." It was neither arrogant nor submissive. It was balanced, almost elegant. For a time, the machinery stalled. Threats followed. The instruments of torture were shown to her. She was warned that her body could be stretched until joints separated. She did not faint. She did not beg. She said that even if forced to speak under torture, she would later declare that it had been coerced. She understood something vital: a confession extracted in pain is unstable. It contaminates the record. So they adjusted. The strategy shifted from confrontation to erosion. Days of questioning blurred together. Sleep was irregular. Guards remained male. Hostility was constant but subtle. No single act could be isolated as cruelty. But the accumulation wore her down. By May 1431, the trial had produced enough ambiguity to justify execution. Yet the judges hesitated. Medieval law allowed mercy for a first-time heretic who repented. Execution required a final step. They needed her to break publicly. On May 24, 1431, she was led to the cemetery of St. Owen, A scaffold stood ready, a sermon was delivered, a document was presented in abjuration. If she signed, she would confess error, deny her visions, submit to the church, and her life would be spared. Imprisonment instead of fire. In the distance, she could see the stake prepared. Months in chains had narrowed her world to survival. She was 19, exhausted, terrified. She signed. The document she marked was brief. Later testimony would suggest that the longer, more damning confession recorded in official transcripts did not match what she had actually agreed to. But the exact wording was almost irrelevant. The signature was enough. She was declared penitent. Execution was suspended. Returned to her cell. She may have believed she had stepped back from the edge. She had not. Under inquisitorial procedure, a relapsed heretic, someone who returned to condemned beliefs after recanting, could be executed without further mercy. No lengthy retrial. No extended debate. Relapse was final. For this to occur, she needed to violate her abjuration. Inside the prison, she was again guarded by men. According to later witness accounts, she had previously worn male clothing not as defiance but as protection. Her garments were tied tightly, secured in a way that made assault more difficult. Now she had agreed to wear women's dress. At some point in the days after her recantation, her female clothing was reportedly removed or made inaccessible. Left with only male attire in her cell, she faced a choice between vulnerability and violation of her pledge. She put the male clothing back on. When judges returned on May 28 and found her dressed that way, they asked why. She explained the practical necessity. She also reaffirmed that her voices had returned and that she believed they were from God. That admission sealed it. The verdict was swift. Relapsed heretic. On May 30, 1431, she was led to the old market square in Rouen. A large crowd gathered. English soldiers lined the route. Clergy were present to formalize the transfer from ecclesiastical to secular authority. The choreography was meticulous. She asked for a crucifix. One was fashioned from wood. Another was brought from a nearby church and held before her as she mounted the platform. The stake was high. The wood was arranged carefully to ensure sustained flame. She was tied tightly to prevent collapse. A placard labeling her crimes was placed upon her. Fire consumes gradually. Smoke first, heat second. Breath becomes labor. Witnesses later reported that she called out the name of Jesus repeatedly. Not once, but again and again, until her voice thinned beneath the roar of flame. When it was over, the executioners raked back the embers to display the remains. Proof of death. Proof that no miracle had intervened. The body was burned again to reduce it further. Ashes were scattered into the sign to prevent relics. The English believed they had erased a threat. They misjudged time. 25 years later, under a different political climate, a rehabilitation trial was authorized. Witnesses from the original proceedings testified. Irregularities were exposed. The manipulation of procedure became visible in hindsight. In 1456, the earlier verdict was annulled. She was declared innocent of heresy. Centuries later, she would be canonized. But sanctity does not undo process. It does not erase the structure that destroyed her. Her final days were not chaos. They were not a sudden outburst of violence. They were administrative, recorded, stamped with authority. The destruction of Joan of Arc was conducted through questions, signatures, and classifications. She did not fall because she renounced courage. She faltered because she trusted that law contained limits. She believed that confession would yield mercy. She assumed that rules meant what they appeared to mean. In the end, the fire was only the visible conclusion. The true execution had begun months earlier, in a courtroom where every answer was catalogued, every hesitation noted, every human fear positioned as evidence. Power did not need to shout. It needed only to proceed. And as the smoke lifted above Rouen in 1431, the system that condemned a 19-year-old girl stood intact, certain of its own righteousness, having proven that when belief challenges authority, authority rarely argues on the battlefield. It waits, it writes, and it makes destruction look like judgment.